Did Oregon State just make a move to try to get into the Big 12?
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, the portal, coaching carousel, all that and more. We've always got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly, so join your friends and download Monopoly Go just like I have, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Plenty of portal talk coming up. Penn State, Colorado, those teams have been active both inside and outside in the transfer portal, having players come and go. We'll talk about that. But Oregon State, did you see what they did? This caught my eye. Why? Because Oregon State has scheduled a home-and-home with the Houston Cougars for 2025 and 2026 in football. Do we all remember the Brian Windhorst meme? I think there's a really good reason that comes up frequently on the show. Just ask yourself, why would they do that? You point the fingers out, head kind of tilted up at a 45-degree angle to the sky. Why would they schedule with Houston? Now, this could be a simple explanation that goes something like this. Oregon State's schedule has gone into a state of flux. They've got a Mountain West conference, or not conference, but they've got a Mountain West scheduling alliance along with Washington State for this year, and they can re-up it next year as well, and they need quality non-conference opponents, and Houston also happen to need one. That'd be the simple explanation. Here's the seven-dimensional chess explanation that Oregon State could be looking at here, and that's that as they look to the future, I have long stated my belief that Oregon State and Washington State intend to rebuild the Pac-12. And that is still something that, starting in 2026, I expect to happen. These two things don't have to be separate, because you could rebuild the Pac-12 into the best group of five conference in all of America and still have an eye towards the future of getting into the Big 12. Because that's ultimately where Oregon State, and by extension Washington State, want to be. And so the Beavs putting the Cougars on their schedule is a way to get in front of that league, to familiarize that league with you, what it means to play in Corvallis, what it's like to have Oregon State come to town. And are they playing a heavy hitter in the conference? Not at this time. Willie Fritz has, got a rebuild job after Dana Holgorsen wasn't able to continue the success he had earlier in his tenure with the Cougars. But the fact that you're picking up a Big 12 opponent here, this is not Washington State getting Texas Tech as part of a schedule reshuffling for 2024, right? That game is going to be played, and certainly that's a good way to get on the Big 12's radar, is to play a football game that people are going to be interested in. And guess what? There are a lot of television homes in Houston. Are they the biggest football draw in the state of Texas? Nope, but they're a member of the Big 12. And if you're Oregon State, if you go win both of those games, and if you're Washington State, if you beat Texas Tech on your home field this year, at the very least, it makes the Big 12 conference turn their heads and say, hey, look at that win over there. Those teams are getting relegated to the group of five. We feel good about these teams over here. Texas Tech has got a win total of 8.5 this year, for goodness sake. If they go into Pullman and lose after Cam Ward, who's the starting quarterback at Miami now, after he leaves the Cougars, well, what are they capable of? You want to be in their heads. Not playing mind games per se, but you want to be on their radar. You want to make people think about you. I work in broadcasting, and when broadcasting jobs come open, a lot of different people apply. You're going to get applicants from all over the place. And as the Big 12 thinks to its, next massive round of expansion, which is probably late 2020s, early 2030s, they're going to be thinking about whoever's on their mind. When applicants come in for a particular job, You want to, and this applies to any industry, I'm sure. I can only speak of that which I have familiarity, and that's the broadcasting world. But you want to be able to send in an application or send in a demo reel and have someone think about you in a way or identify you in some way, have some level of familiarity. And if in a few years or many years, you're talking about who's the Big 12 going to add to their conference one day, you would want them to be thinking about, well, I know those teams can compete with the teams we've got over here. And man, we saw our teams go to their locations. Their fans were awesome. It was a great game. It was exciting. Look how many people watched on television over here. Washington State is an underrated television product. You look at the numbers they've put up over the last several years, I think they tap into the Seattle TV market more than they probably get credit for. So I think this is a really smart move for Oregon State because you have nothing to lose. You have everything to gain, which is threefold. Number one, you get a Power 4 opponent on your schedule. That's not something that you readily have available outside of Oregon's continued desire to continue that rivalry, which I am fully in support of. Number two, you have the opportunity to showcase yourself to the Big 12 and get them to understand why Oregon State should be included in whatever the next massive round of realignment is, even if it's way, way down the line. You got to lay the foundation for this stuff early on. Everyone who wasn't left behind, I'm not saying Oregon State and Washington State did anything specifically wrong, but those schools who have been included, the foundation for building up that sort of brand, that sort of reputation, that started a long, long time ago. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing, you've got a 12-team playoff. You've got a 12-team playoff. The ultimate goal for Oregon State and Washington State would be to get to that level. Oregon State was playing at that sort of level. Don't tell me it can't be done. Is it harder now because they have got a pending de facto relegation to the Mountain West? Yep, it is absolutely tougher. But are Mountain West teams going to be in the running there? Look at what Air Force was doing last year. Air Force started the year 7-0. This was in the 4-team playoff. And Air Force, when they started 7-0, yeah, they were getting buzz. So if you put a quality non-conference win on your schedule, that legitimizes a potentially, really, really strong record that you could put up because you're playing a bunch of teams that, are still solid at the Group of 5 level, but Oregon State and Washington State, in theory, should be able to outspend them, especially with the revenues that they have gotten and the settlement from the 10 departing Pac schools who are going to the Big 10, ACC, and the Big 12. And if you build on that war chest and you amplify your program every way you can, this is a great opportunity to do that. So I think it's a really smart move from Oregon State. Does it ensure that they're going to have access to the Big 12, that they will get invited one day? No. But is it the sort of step in that direction that had to at least be considered? Maybe it was just, maybe I'm being too tinfoil hat conspiracy guy here. Maybe it was just, hey, we need a non-conference game in 2025 and 2026. Who needs one? Well, Houston does. Oh, okay, yeah, hey, let's play. We haven't played each other in a very long time. Why don't we renew this sort of matchup? That'd be great. Maybe that's all it was. I'd be shocked if there wasn't at least a positive externality approach from the officials at Oregon State that helped put all of this together, and the administrators and everybody. Quite a bit goes into scheduling a football game. But I'd be shocked if the conversation had come up, hey, this can keep us on the Big 12's radar in the short term, and you don't know, right? I think in 2026, Pac-12 will be rebuilt by then with a mix of Mountain West and American Conference teams from, and maybe some ACC leftovers and whatnot if that league ends up splintering. But I don't wish that to happen, and we'll just kind of see how that all plays out. But I got all Brian Windhorse with why would they do that? I'd tell you to drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments, but guess what? I know you're going to do that anyway. You know what else you're going to do? Stick around because the transfer portal is kind of delivering. Not kind of. It is delivering on being wild, crazy, exciting, and fun. And there's a wide receiver from Penn State you need to know about. This episode of Locked On College Football brought to you by our sponsors at Yahoo Finance. Let's get straight to the point. You want to grow your portfolio to deal with the rising cost of inflation, to pay off your debt or your mortgage, pretty much anything standing in the way of you and financial freedom, right? Who doesn't? With Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and tools you need in order to help reach that financial freedom. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. The number one finance destination is Yahoo Finance, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor. That's yahoofinance.com, the number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. Keandre Lambert-Smith becomes one of the most highly coveted wide receivers in the transfer portal right now. Zach Seyko, Locked On Penn State, joining me here. Lambert-Smith has heard from a bunch of big-time names. Programs like Georgia or Auburn, Colorado has reached out. Texas A&M, West Virginia, all reportedly have contacted or attempted to contact him. How good is Keandre Lambert-Smith? Why is he getting that level of attention?
I mean, he's getting that level of attention because he is a fifth-year veteran in college football. He was going to be a starter at Penn State, but something just happened. There is some sort of rift that's going on between him and Penn State, whether that's the team, the coaching staff, something changed because it was all, sunshine and rainbows towards the end of his junior season where he showed out against Michigan State, the Rose Bowl, and then had a good game against West Virginia. But then when it mattered most, did not show up against Ohio State. And nobody did, but that was supposed to be your leading wideout, right? And then completely absent against Michigan. Mike Yurcich gets fired and then is completely phased out of the offense. You don't see him at all for almost the remainder of the season. And that goes for the bowl game as well against Ole Miss. So what happened from somebody that put up 100+ yards against West Virginia, 2 touchdowns, and then is nowhere to be found against Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl? Like, this is truly, and then you bring in Julian Fleming. Trey Wallace is progressively getting better, other receivers on Penn State's team. And now the conversation goes, KLS is the number one wide receiver on Penn State's team in 2023, but then gets knocked down the depth chart to number 3, becoming the third option in the wide receiver room. I mean, that is, you have to make sense of that somehow. So yes, I mean, he's a capable wide receiver. I think he's talented, but I think people are overrating him here. That's just my honest opinion.
So if he's someone who, would have been a starter at Penn State, certainly he's capable of being a starter elsewhere. But when you think about what sort of receiver he can be, how can he fit into any offense? Is he adaptable to any system? Does he need to have a really good quarterback? Can he play on the outside, inside? What sort of player is available here?
So he can play any of your 3 traditional wide receiver spots, X, Y, and Z. So either of the boundaries in the slot. That's where he was projecting, at least on my depth chart and a lot of other people's, that he would make that transition to the slot receiver spot. But I wouldn't even call it a transition because Keandre Lambert-Smith could play any of the 3 traditional wide receiver spots. But I would characterize him, I'd relate him more to a slot receiver. I think he's better there. He's shifty, he's quick, and he's a pretty good route runner. Again, how much of it is coaching? How much of it is actually himself, where he and other receivers just weren't able to get open a season ago. I can't imagine that's all schematics. Mike Yurcich was fired for a reason, but at some point the wide receivers just have to get open. Drew Aller didn't turn the ball over because he was not going to throw into those windows where his guys weren't getting separation. So it takes a quarterback that is just going to be, confident in himself. That's one thing, got to get the football to him. But you're going to need a coach, an offensive coordinator that's going to have to scheme Keandre Lambert-Smith open at times. And above all else, Keandre Lambert-Smith cannot be the number one wide receiver, especially if he's going to SEC country. If he does end up at Auburn, if he does happen to end up at Georgia or anywhere else, it would be because they intend for him to be the second or third option. He is not going to be a number one. If you want to put him at another type of school, maybe you could be a number one at Colorado, but again, you're getting that same base of he will be good, but he won't be great. He's not a number one in my book. And he proved that when, it came down to crunch time, Michigan and Ohio State, nowhere to be found.
So now that Penn State has that opening on the offensive side of the football for a part of their game that's one of their biggest questions in the offseason, how can the passing game improve under first-year offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki, who, I think Penn State fans are rightly pretty excited to have over there. Is Penn State now on the prowl for a wide receiver in the transfer portal?
They should be. I think they should. There's, again, another split. Some people are saying that, yeah, they should. I'm in that boat. Some people say, no, they don't need another wide receiver. And this is Keandre Lambert-Smith leaving is addition by subtraction. I absolutely think they need a wide receiver. They need a specific type of wide receiver. They check off multiple boxes here with Julian Fleming in terms of getting a leader, getting someone that's really good at blocking. One of the biggest weaknesses from Penn State's wide receiver core is that really nobody could block a season ago, and that hindered the running game to an extent, at least the explosiveness of it. Julian Fleming was the second best blocker, according to PFF, on Ohio State's roster, period. And that includes the offensive line. He had the best run blocking grade. So Julian Fleming upgrades there, but he's still a possession receiver, Spencer. Penn State needs somebody that can stretch defenses, that can go over the top. A KJ Hamler type, a Jahan Dotson. I'm not saying overall talent, but just a speedster. They just need someone that can clock as, maybe a sub 4.4 and get somebody that, we got to keep our safeties back because we do not want this player burning our defense. And Drew Aller has the arm strength to hit that wide receiver. Drew Aller isn't inept of talent, but when it comes to scheme, available options, at time confidence, yeah, that's what you do need. And I think a speed threat opens all of that up, and it opens up the running game and a lot of things. So they just need someone that can go deep, and Drew Aller can chuck that football all the way down to that, and that whoever that wide receiver is. That's what they need. They need a speedster.
Speaking of Penn State quarterback Drew Aller, he was on display in the spring game. It was a dominant win for White, 27 to nothing for the Nittany Lions. And who wins doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. What does matter is how guys look. A new offensive coordinator, as I mentioned, they've got some influx of talent with guys like Julian Fleming at wide receiver. There was a little bit of flack being directed towards Drew Aller in regard to the spring game, but you're defending him. Why?
I'm defending him I have tons of reasons. I have multiple episodes up on Locked On Nittany Lions, so I encourage people to go check those out, podcast, YouTube, wherever you watch and listen. But Spencer, Drew Aller is going into a new offense. This is a spring game. Keandre Lambert-Smith was not there with his intentions of going into the portal even before he officially entered. Julian Fleming was on the other team since he was a transfer, and James Franklin wanted to see him going up against the ones. So Drew Aller didn't have his full offense. Nicholas Singleton was out. Katron Allen was out. Right. So the offensive line was banged up because the scout defense, the defensive line, had 4 sacks and 6 tackles for loss. So they had pretty good pressure that day. So if you give Penn State and that offense, Drew Aller, all of the number ones like they're supposed to be, there's a lot of context that's missing to a bad day. Also, there was a weather advisory in effect for the entire afternoon. Okay. Canopies were flying. Tailgates did not go. Tailgates were canceled by some people because of how windy it was. People just say, oh, there were some wind gusts. Spencer, there were 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts on average.
50. Not 1.5. This is 5.0 we are talking about here.
5.0, yes. Winds typically 20 to 25 miles an hour with gusts up to 40, 50 miles an hour throughout the day. So no quarterback was going to look good in that environment. And I think for Drew Aller to go, I think it was 15 to 32. He had 1 touchdown and 202 yards, no turnovers. I think Drew Aller's really good at protecting the football. And so you got to give him credit where credit's due. So you're missing those options on offense. You're on the conditions. You're in and out of the game, right? You have quarterback, you and Bo Prabula are switching out. So Drew Aller can't exactly get hot, and then combine that with a new offense. So there's a lot of context that's missing. Sure. Did Drew Aller, mechanics break down, footwork looked a little shifty at times? Yes, because those are some of his weaknesses, but you also have to put it into perspective of you can correct those things, but the overarching storylines here are being just neglected. Nobody's talking about them the way they should be. It's just, oh, Drew Aller looked bad. That's the story. Penn State's going to be, 8-4, 7-5, because we can compile a bunch of misinterpreted clips here on social media.
Yeah, FanDuel's got Penn State as a favorite to be a college football playoff team in 2024 by just a little bit. Zach Seyko, Locked On Penn State. Zach, thanks as always.
I appreciate it, Spencer. Anytime.
Colorado. Remember Colorado? Like, remember the Alamo of sorts? Well, they're trying to make some moves in the transfer portal. Before we get to the Buffs, this episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. So I've been told that I'm a competitive person. I don't know where you get that notion. Playing sports my whole life, video games and all that sort of stuff, golfing nowadays. I like playing with people if they're willing to play a match anytime I can, but maybe I am. Maybe I'm just a competitive person. So I have that side to me, and my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times, one of which is on this cellular device right here. That's my phone right there, because it's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. The best part is you can either mess with your friends or you can play with your friends. The leaderboards show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. There's all sorts of great interactive elements, and it's not just my competitive side that loves it, because you can team up with friends and play together as well. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. The latest in the portal for Colorado. Where could Cormani McClain end up? Kevin Borba, Locked On Buffs, joining me here to discuss. So, actually, hold on. We got to pause. Do I have your X handle right? It's down at the bottom of the screen. Is it just at Kevin Borba?
You throw in a couple.
Colorado continues to be busy in the portal, both reaching out to players and having players depart. Kevin Borba, Locked On Buffs, joining me here on the show. Let's start with Cormani McClain. Kevin, what's the latest that you are hearing? Where might the former 5-star and number one cornerback recruit in the class of 2023 end up?
Yeah, I think Cormani is probably going to end up closer to home. Obviously, Boulder, Colorado is a long way away from Lakeland, Florida, and I think schools like Miami and Florida, who are both heavily in the mix for his recruitment, the first time around are schools to look out for. If he does have an interest in kind of staying away from home, I know Utah would be interested, or at least be in the mix there. He visited BYU on an unofficial during his recruiting process, which is like a random thing that most people overlook. So look out for the Florida schools. I would also look out for maybe like a South Carolina, but I do expect him to kind of return at least closer to home a little bit, just because sometimes it doesn't work out when you venture away from home.
Yeah, and certainly, you know, Miami was heavily involved in his recruitment. I talked about that on yesterday's show, but I'm interested to hear you say Utah, because you're talking about a guy with all the physical traits to be a high-end corner and all-conference sort of guy. Didn't work out at Colorado. And by the way, you know, Dion, of course, legendary defensive back, but the rest of the defensive staff that was in place last year, let's just say they've changed defensive staffs, and I don't think anybody in Colorado is necessarily upset about that. Utah, on the other hand, has one of the best, most consistent defensive head coaches in Kyle Whittingham in all of college football. I think the Utes would be an outstanding place for him to go.
Yeah, I think realistically it comes down to how much does he care about his development. Because if he cares about his development, then Utah's the place to be. Florida and Miami both have coaching staffs on the hot seat. So do you really want to risk going?
Well, Florida a little more than Miami, but
right. But
yeah.
Like if they both have sub 500 seasons, Florida, like you said, a little bit more, then you're going to be playing for a new coaching staff again in this time of next year. If you go to Utah, Kyle Whittingham has been a staple there. He's been there, I think, both of our whole lives, if I'm not mistaken. Like
I believe this is year 19 he's going into.
Almost all of our lives. But it's one of those things where it's like he has the chance to really harness his talent. We did not see him harness his talent. He gave up. He was torched, realistically, when he played at Colorado. He had a couple bright moments, but he was consistently torched. I think it's unfortunate that him and Coach Prime couldn't figure out a way to like make it work, because obviously learning from the best corner in NFL history is quite the person to learn from. But again, sometimes things don't always work out. People aren't how you expected them to be, and situations aren't how you expected them to be. So Utah would be a great fit, I would say, if he's willing to focus on his development and not focus on just getting back closer to home.
Yeah, I love the point you made about the coaching continuity. Florida will certainly want to get a guy of this caliber with Billy Napier and company, but like you said, they've got the hardest schedule in all of college football. They might not be around next season, depending on how this year goes. So, what other buffs have entered the transfer portal? Because as I again mentioned on yesterday's show, Colorado's really feeling both sides of the transfer portal because they are in the running for some notable recruits. They are also having a good number of players leave the program. And apparently, if you want to go to Colorado, you just shoot Shiloh Sanders a DM.
Yeah, just shoot him a DM if you play defense. Shoot Shador a DM if you play offense. Really weird sort of advertising, but
Very weird.
Who knows? That's the Colorado experience these days. In terms of portal losses, because I think that's what we were talking about before we decided they're weird, weird things. Miles Slusher is one that stands out to me, but the other one that's not getting talked about enough is Jaden Milner-Jones. He started quite a few games for them last year. I think he played in all 12, and he was a secondary member that was an under-recruited defensive back that was making more of an impact. And not to go back to Cormani, but there was a lot of like, why is this kid playing well and Cormani isn't? And so like he played quite well. And realistically, the one position that they loaded up on in the portal thus far and probably will add more talent to is the secondary. And so I think he just kind of felt like he was maybe getting pushed out of the starting lineup or having a chance to start because they brought in veterans. And sometimes you just get outranked by guys in experience, and it's okay. But he's someone who I think he'll be a Power 5 transfer, and I do think he could be the starter somewhere else.
Another guy who will be a Power 5 transfer is running back Dallan Hayden, who has been tied to Colorado. He reportedly had a phone call with Deion Sanders yesterday morning about the possibility of coming to the Buffs. Have you heard anything since then, and how big of an addition would that be?
Yeah, I've heard Colorado is, I won't say really pushing for him, but they want him. A lot of programs want him. He's kind of an odd case in Ohio State. If you look at his freshman years, like freshman year, he had over 500 yards rushing. On his career, he averages over 5 yards per carry. And so he's going to be a hot commodity regardless of like what program it is. But if you're Colorado, they need him. I've been harping on the running back position for quite some time. Dylan Edwards, he's 5'9". Like they say he's 170-ish. I would be shocked. He's going to be moved out to wide receiver a lot more this year. Their other running back, Michael Welch, is a freshman. So it depends on how much you want to trust a true freshman to be the leader of your backfield. And then they have Alton McCaskill, the Houston transfer from last year. Hasn't played a meaningful snap since 2021. He played like a few games last season and realized he wasn't ready to return from injury. And so that's a lot of ifs in that running back room. You bring in someone who is healthy, who has proven himself a little bit, and just needs a chance to start. And I think that's where Dallan Hayden comes into the mix. I think he could be their starting running back, or at worst could be someone that they could rotate in because injuries happen. Ineligible things happen, like guys struggle academically, whatever it may be, you never know. And so you just want to have as many available bodies as possible, and having one that's Power 5 experience and played at one of the best programs in the country really helps.
Yeah, and Hayden's heard from Auburn is on the list, Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech both on the list. Louisville is on the list as well. I think there might be one more school in the mix, but certainly he's a highly coveted guy, pretty highly rated 4-star recruit coming out of high school, and I think has that starting potential, just needs the right opportunity, which is why the fit with the Buffs could be there. But when I hear you say he can push to be RB1, well, maybe he'd be able to find a place where he is RB1, because I think that's what he's probably going to be looking for in the transfer portal, given his first 2 years of college football. Let's look elsewhere for the Buffs in the portal here, Kevin. What moves have you liked so far from the first portal window, and what is still left to be desired for this roster as they try to at least make a bowl game in 2024?
Yeah, so I like their moves in the across the defense line, whether it's pass rushers, interior defense linemen. They got size, they got girth, Spencer. They didn't have girth last year. They were getting shoved around all over the place.
Yeah.
They got a guy like Anquin Barnes from Alabama who didn't play, but he comes in at 6'5", like 315 pounds. Like, dude is a monster. He's ginormous. They got Quincy Wiggins from LSU, former 4-star recruit. And then they got guys who actually did have some playing experience, like Torian Carter. And then you look at their pass rushers. BJ Green, who I know you're quite familiar with.
Yes, good
had
player.
5 sacks, all second. I think he was all Pac-12 second team last year. And then they got a guy from Pitt named Samuel. I always butcher his last name, so I call him Samuel O. He also had 5 sacks.
Okunlola?
Yes, sure. I think it's Okunalola is how I say it sometimes. I'm all over the place. I just go with however I feel that day. But he had 5 sacks, and he wasn't really in the starting lineup for the Panthers last year. So you get him and BJ Green opposite sides, and Colorado has a pass rush. So I like him there. I like the receivers, even though they didn't really need that many receivers. They brought in some talented ones. LeJonte Wester is probably the fastest guy in the country, or at least one of the fastest guys in the country. So they have a lot of talent coming in. Obviously, we got to mention the offensive line as well. They brought in 5 guys, 6 counting Jordan Seaton from the high school ranks. So it'll be interesting to see how those all pan out.
Yeah, the trenches were probably the biggest weakness for the Buffs last year. You think about games that they lost, the blowout against Oregon, their offensive line was just overwhelmed. You look at the game against UCLA, which before the year started, I actually had pegged as a potential upset win for the Buffs. Going into that game, I had changed my pick because, well, I just didn't think that they were going to be able to match up with UCLA's defensive line, which was very good last year, and they were just constantly overwhelmed. I'll get you out of here on this, Kevin. Colorado has had their spring game, yes?
No, at the end of the month.
Right, end of the month. It's all crisscrossing, and my wires are all over the place and such. I think that in that game, Colorado fans will see a Shedeur Sanders that is better protected. Mm-hmm. And you look at the numbers he put up last year when he wasn't protected at all. He was protected the least of any quarterback in all of college football, and those are the numbers that he put up. If that's just a slightly below average offensive line, Shedeur Sanders can have, not exaggerating here, a Heisman caliber year.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's that factor, and then I think we talked about it on another episode as well. The new offense is more catered to his skill set. He said so himself. He said that there's more chances for him to choose what routes the receivers run rather than the receivers choosing what route they run, which can get a little confusing at times, and also leads to Shedeur holding onto the ball. But the offense line is the big part, because even when he wasn't getting pressured, he was probably hurting. He got hit so much where he was probably in pain a lot of the time anyway. The UCLA game that you brought up stands out a lot because they had, I would say, 3 sort of NFL caliber defensive linemen or pass rushers coming at him.
Yeah.
And there's just one play in particular where I think it was an RPO. We'll never know because it got broken up so quickly. But they tackled just both Shedeur and the running back at the same time. Like they just got both of them at the same time. So Shedeur just needs a little more time to throw the ball, a little more time to breathe, and he still threw for 27 touchdowns to 3 picks. So he obviously is a very polished quarterback, and I think having, like you said, an average offensive line, even below average, would be great. But all the guys they brought in have some sort of high-quality experience. They're not just bringing in guys that they're hoping can play. They brought in some guys that are proven, didn't give up a lot of sacks, and so I think a well-protected Shedeur Sanders is a Colorado team that can go a lot further than people realize.
Kevin Borba, Locked On Buffs, the latest from Boulder. Thank you, Kevin.
Yep.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.